Today we're going to talk about rebuilding an American Browning or a Remington Model 11, which is one and the same gun. During the war years, the FN plant was closed down and Browning was unable to produce their Auto 5, so they contracted with Remington in the United States to continue building their guns. So Remington tooled up to build the Auto 5 during the war years when the Belgian plant was closed. And apparently an agreement was struck that after the war, Remington would be able to continue making the gun under the, it would be referred to as the Model 11. And during the war years when they built these Brownings, here's one here, it says Browning on the receiver, it says Browning on the barrel. We refer to them as American Brownings. It's not really, I get guys that call me and say, I've got this Browning, and they talk about it, and the first thing I ask is, where's the serial number? And they say it's on the left side of the receiver. And my response is always the same, well, that's not really a Browning, that's a Model 11. They say, no, it's a Browning, it says right on the receiver. Browning says on the barrel, Browning. I say, I know what it says. And I go through my spiel about during the war years, and I probably ought to come up with a recording I can just put on so I can save my breath on that. But we've got one that's come into the shop, and we're going to talk about rebuilding these guns because there's a ton of them out there, and every one of them pretty much needs a rebuild. They're real bad about collapsing springs, and when the springs collapse in them, the recoil is horrendous, and it beats the heck out of the gun, beats up on you. So we're going to talk about rebuilding one. We sell a kit, a rebuild kit for the Model 11. And in that kit, we have a new recoil spring, action spring, magazine spring retainer, 3-shot adapter, your action spring plug, new bronze and piece and friction ring. And these guns, what's unique to this kit is this buffer that goes in the back of the receiver. They don't always need these buffers. In fact, I've looked at this gun here. The buffer's good in it. They rivet them in place, and it's going to be tough for you guys out there in the real world to pull this thing out and rivet it back in. So about all we can do is kind of epoxy them in place. They seem to hold pretty well, but you know, if it's not broke, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If that buffer's good, don't worry about it. I don't have laying here in front of me a magazine spring, which is in this kit also. We're going to begin by dismantling this gun and talking about it as we go. I've already pulled a few of the little lock screws out. They have a different lock screw in them, different from the Belgian guns, and they're famous for losing those lock screws. I'm going to have some of them made up because there's so many of them out there that we need them. And let's go ahead and tear this gun down, and we'll talk about it as we do so. We'll get our barrel off. I can tell you the recoil spring in this gun is collapsed. I can feel just by how mushy the barrel is and how little tension there is on it. And now these Model 11s, these American Brownings, a lot of them, not all of them, most of them have these pins in the forearms. And there's holes in the receiver, and that is so the forearm will go in and not rock around and shift around. And that's a good idea, but they break, they crack the forearms every time. This one's cracked here. It's a miracle it's not cracked on this side, and half the time the pins are gone. They fall out. They're not really necessary, but it's part of a American Browning, a Model 11. So as we take this gun apart, pull the barrel out, there's very few parts that interchange out of a Belgian-made gun with one of these American guns. The barrel extension is different. The guts in it, they're all different pretty much. But the springs, bronze pieces, and that sort of thing, the critical things pretty much interchange. Now, this particular gun has the old square recoil spring, and compare it with a new spring. The thing's like 3 inches shorter. Well, this spring originally was, 3 inches longer. And it's collapsed that much, and they do that. They're famous for doing that. And once that happens, when you fire that gun, it's going to beat the stuffings out of you. It's going to beat up the gun, and these things need to be replaced. So we'll go ahead and I've kind of partially dismantled this gun just so we don't spend a lot of time taking it down. I've got screws that I've taken out. Take the stalks off generally by tapping it on the bench like so. And then you remove your trigger plate. Now, this rear screw is a screw and doesn't have a lock screw on it, and has to come out so you can remove the trigger plate. Now we have another screw that looks like a screw, but it's not. It's a pin. This screw right here is not really a screw. You just push it out. The lock screw holds it in place. So there's no threads on it. It's just basically a pin. Gone. Now, our trigger plate will come out. Now, these things work on the same line as the Belgian Brownings. You have your mainspring is located here. You have, as I took this gun apart the other day, one thing you need to always check, I noticed the mainspring screw is really loose on this gun. They tell me it'll make them go full automatic. If that screw gets loose, I don't know. That's what I've been taught and told. But basically, the trigger plate assembly is the same. You have your safety sear. The link comes against that and hits like so. But there's nothing really interchangeable here with the Belgium guns. The safety's different, trigger's different, just different. Now, the carrier spring is the same as the early Belgium guns. It lays in the side of the receiver. Just pop it out. Remove your carrier screws. Carrier screws on these guns have 4 notches in them for the lock screw. The Belgian guns only have 1. That doesn't really mean them a lot, but I'm not sure if the Belgium gun carrier screws will fit or not. I've never really tried one, but so we remove our carrier, 1-piece carrier. It's a cruddy gun. It needs a clean up really bad. We remove our I'm going to remove our action spring by pushing out the pin at the rear and pulling that out. And I've already gone through this gun and put a new action spring in it, a new action spring plug. As we talked about in our kit here, you have a new action spring plug. The early ones were wooden, made out of wood, and they're not very good. They don't last very long. But I've already replaced this action spring, and the spring I took out of this gun was badly collapsed. These 2 springs, the action spring, the recoil spring, those are the 2 springs that are the most critical. Those need to be replaced. Now, at this point, you really don't have to remove the bolt to put in your new springs, but I'm going to take this one out just to show you what I consider to be kind of a bad design on these American guns. To take out your locking block latch, that's what this hole is designed for in a receiver, access hole. You slide your bolt forward till you see the little notch come up. Now you know it's ready to come out. Now, on the Belgium guns, they have a little half moon cutout where you can get your punch in there and drive it out. These don't have it. I can barely see the locking block pin down in through the receiver here. I've even had to cut some notches on occasion out of these guns so I could get access to that pin. You need a little small tiny punch. You can kind of get in there if you're lucky and tap that pin out, and it comes out this side of the receiver. I'm going to need a little longer pin. Anyway, that's not a good design, but it's just what it is. Now on this this gun, it was set up for light loads. That's why your spring, your ring was at the bottom here. This is the original bronze piece, and the friction ring goes around it. I've taken the friction ring out of this gun, and I put in a Belgium ring. You'll see that the friction rings on these guns. Let me see if I've got one here. They're kind of no. I don't see one over there, but the friction rings on these guns, on the American Brownings and the Model 11s, are kind of a taller ring with a bevel on each side. They're just not good. Get rid of them. Don't use them. And the reason I like the Belgium rings are because when you set it up for light loads, you turn it upside down and slide it on your tube and store it at the bottom, and you've got a nice flat here. On these guns, they've got to know that their rings have a bevel on the top, and it's just not a good idea to use them. Just go with a thinner, smaller Belgium ring. Now I've taken out my locking block latch pin. Now I can slide my breech bolt out, my operating handle. Well, this gun needs a cleaning badly, so we're going to clean that up later. Now I'm going to take this out and show you. This bolt is completely different with a Belgium gun. Belgium gun will not interchange with it. They have real narrow rails on the locking block. These have a pin, firing pin retaining pin that comes out real easy. It's got a ring on it here that kind of locks it in place. But I'm taking it out because I want to show you these rails on the locking block. They're real thin. Usually they have one on both sides, and they're famous for breaking off. And that's a problem because that's a real obsolete gun, and finding a new one of those locking blocks is going to be tough. You'll probably have to go to an obsolete gun part dealer and pay a pretty good price. You probably have to buy the complete bolt. But we're going to go ahead and reassemble this, put this back in place. You won't need to take this out when you're doing your rebuild, putting your springs in. I'm just showing you a few things about this gun that makes it a little different from a Belgium gun. You have to roll your firing pin in, get the notch lined up right. Then your retaining pin goes in, slides in very easy, and it won't come out because it's got a groove in it here, and your operating handle slides in and holds that in place. So I just wanted to show you that. Basically, we have a stripped out receiver now. These things will break off action tubes just like Belgium guns. The Belgium action tubes will replace them. You have to bore out the tang, silver solder them in place. Not much difference in them really. They have a lock screw on the magazine tube. A little different. Works along the same design, of course, as a Belgium gun, but it's a little different. So let's put this back in. We didn't really need to take it out, but we're doing it just for demonstration purposes. Let's reassemble our bolt. Let's line up, put in our locking block latch spring, our locking block latch, slide it in. They're easy to take apart and put together. On a Belgian gun, you could slide this back, find the little notch, and put it in this way. You can't on this gun. This one, you have to slide it back, slide the bolt back until you see the opening in the receiver where your pin goes. Simple. but not a good design. The way this comes out. Now, the point. Okay, we're to the point now. Let's see where there's my action tube follower. It stayed down in the action tube as I took it out. Just do like you would on a Belgium gun. Take your new spring, slide your action spring follower on. We already have our action spring plug put on. This is a new spring. The old one was very collapsed, and I've already replaced it. So now we are ready to put it back together, just as you would on if you're doing a Belgium gun. Just slide in this action spring follower is a little tight in here. I go in there and hone these out a little bit. That's a good idea. But slide it back in. Push it down, line up your hole, and put in your retaining pin with your new action spring plug. The new plastic. The plastic's better than the old wood ones that rot, dry rot. When that's in place, put in your carrier. Put your carrier screws in. Browning's their carrier screws are they have to go in the right side, or they won't line up. On these, on these Remingtons, you can put in either side because they've got 4 notches in it, and they always have one that'll line up best. I won't put the lock screws in just yet. Put your carrier spring back in, put it on the rear pin, rotate it around, and push it down under the front pin, and make sure it's up against the side of the receiver, or you won't be able to get in your trigger plate. Put your trigger plate in from the rear, roll it around, put your front retaining screw or pin, in this case, in place, and your rear trigger plate. And there again, it's just like a Browning Belgium gun. To get your trigger plate to come in position, you need to pull the bolt back just a little bit, then your trigger plate will pop up into position. And put in your rear trigger plate screw. And I'm not going to put lock screws in, as I say, because I'm getting ready to tear this gun down and re-blue it anyway. So we haven't put our lock screws in. Not necessary. Doesn't have to have them. Put our stock on the gun. Now these stocks, you cannot use a Belgium stock on these guns. There's a different swing through the hook of the trigger plate. They just don't work. And it's kind of a problem. It's a real problem because there's no wood out there for an old Remington or American Browning gun other than some aftermarket ones. Sile made them, probably still does make them. It's about all you can use on them. They don't look a whole lot like factory, but they work. So we put the gun back together. We're to the point now, we're getting close to being ready to go test fire this gun. I'm going to set it for, I'm going to put my new spring on. Look at the difference in those springs. Wow. This gun was a real kicker. I shot it with this spring in it, and it really thumped. With this new spring in it, it'll tame it way, way down. But the spring slides on. I'm going to set it for heavy loads, bevel up on the steel ring, bevel up on the bronze ring. And as always, like any other Belgium gun, you need a drop of oil on the magazine tube. And I should have put a drop, and I didn't do a drop of oil on that action tube before I put the stock on. Do that. So we're set up for heavy loads. Now the barrel goes on, as I've always talked about. Set them for the heavy loads, and if you're going to be shooting light loads, still set it on heavy loads, and try to see if it works. If it works, you're good. If not, well, then you're going to have to set it on for light loads. So Put your forearm on. Magazine cap. They are unique to the gun. The Belgium caps don't fit them. So there we have it. We have put in our new rebuild kit. Something I forgot to talk about while I had this gun down is the buffer that's in the back of the frame. This one has a good buffer. I looked in there earlier, and it's all there. It's not broken or cracked. So, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just leave it as it is. If it's bad or if it's not in there, you can go ahead and put your epoxy your new buffer in place. The Belgian guns don't have this buffer, and as far as I'm concerned, in this American Browning, they really don't need them. If you have the springs set the way they're supposed to be, that buffer is pretty much unnecessary. But it's in the kit if you want to use it. I didn't go over the magazine spring. I did replace it earlier. And we have in our kit a magazine spring, and we have a magazine spring retainer. And you pull that out by just hooking this on a nail driven into your bench, just like you would on the Belgium guns. Just hook the nail on it, pop it out. Put in your new magazine spring, and those are the critical springs. Action spring, recoil spring. This is the action spring, recoil spring, the magazine spring, which I've already put in the gun. It's a long spring. We're going to go shoot this gun and see if it will function and see how it is. I bet you it's tamed it way down on recoil. And we'll go back in the back and shoot it and see what it does.